Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. EDINA Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, EDINA Eye offers comprehensive services for dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller with you from an undisclosed location as we begin another Zoom episode. And we're very fortunate to have also from an undisclosed location, James Backstrom, Jim Backstrom, who has been the Dakota County Attorney going back many moons since 1987. And Jim, as far as I know, you are either the senior or next senior county attorney in the state of Minnesota. Is that
well,
correct?
Good afternoon. It's nice to be with you again in this new format. I am the second most senior county attorney in the state of Minnesota. The McLeod County Attorney, Mike Young, has got me beat by about 4 or 5 months, and I'm never going to catch him because he's 4 or 5 years younger than I am. So, but anyways, I've been here quite a while. It's been an honor and a privilege to have this position for as long as I have.
Now, I guess as we should explain to first-time viewers what it is that the county attorney does, because it's kind of unique in this state.
Well, it is. You know, the county attorneys in Minnesota have a much wider range of authority than do district attorneys or state's attorneys, as the prosecutors are known in many jurisdictions across the country. And that's because we're also the civil legal advisor to county government. I think that's where the actual name county attorney comes from, because we are the county's attorney. So we have a civil function. We enforce child support obligations, which very few people realize the county attorney is involved in, but we collected close to $47 million in Dakota County last year in child support obligations that were owed. So we're helping families and children in that regard. We have a juvenile and protective services an appellate division in my office, which deals with all juvenile crime, all adult and child protection related issues, which are not criminal. Those are civil related interventions to protect children or to protect vulnerable adults if that needs to take place. We do that in a civil court setting. And then we handle commitments of people who have mental illness or chemical dependency if that's necessary. And we handle all the appeals through that unit of my office. And then the criminal division, which is the prosecutorial function, is the largest unit in my office. And that is the one that most people see me in reference to, at least in the public.
So that's just a few things that you find on your plate. Now, you and I go back to the days when Zoom didn't even appear other than somebody who was speeding and getting pulled over and getting charged with a ticket. So how has your office changed? And as I know, I am trying to get used to this new world that we live in and the IT world. How has your job changed, your office changed with the pandemic?
Well, listen, it's been a challenge for everyone in our society, and I certainly wish everyone who's listening into this conversation well and hope they remain safe and their families remain safe. It's a scary time. And in terms of our office work, we right now have 77% of our staff working remotely, working from home basically. And we did quite a bit of work in the month of March to get all that set up in the county. I think overall in the county of Dakota, there's about 80% of the staff that are working from home. But in my office, it's 77%, and 23% of my staff is on site. We do have obviously important responsibilities that we have to deal with, and we're continuing to do that work in many cases remotely. And I've been working from home myself for the most part since the middle of March, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge just to stay connected with everyone that you're working with, probably more than anything else. But we are getting the important work that my office oversees done, and I'm proud of my staff for continuing to do that.
And let's talk about your staff a little bit. How large is your staff?
Well, we have 36 attorneys right now, where we have one position that's vacant. Excuse me, that's the ones that are working from home. So altogether, there's 43 attorney positions in the office, not counting me, and then we have one position that's vacant. So if you add me in, we have about 45 attorneys in our office. We have about, let's see, 47, 48 support staff. We're close to about 100 staff altogether. If you count our law clerks that we employ, at least 5 to 7 law clerks from the various Minnesota law schools at any given time. We're about 100 people in our office.
So that's a big operation. Now, the people who are working, the 23% who are going in, how do you arrange for the social distancing? How do you arrange for separation, things like that?
What we're doing right now, there's, we have a fairly large office space. Most of my office is located in Hastings. I do have a satellite division. Our child support enforcement unit is located in West St. Paul at the Northern Service Center. But most of our staff is in Hastings. And when there's only, probably about 20, 15 to 20 people at any given time in the office, they can spread out quite a bit. So that's not a significant concern. Although we do have guidelines in place that if you're out of your workspace and going into a break room, which we have that are not very large, we are only allowing one person at a time into those areas, and we're going to be implementing it in the county. We just had a conversation with the county manager, Matt Smith, and other senior leaders in Dakota County. We're going to be, hopefully starting around May 18th, or at least by the end of this month, to bring some more county staff back into our buildings and open up some county buildings by appointment for essential services that individuals need to work with county staff on. And we're going to implement the use of masks for anyone in a public area in our buildings at that time. And so we're doing a lot of planning and a lot of extra cleaning and that sort of thing as well.
And a lot of extra time that you're putting into things that are over and above what you normally do. For instance, someone is arrested today. They have to be arraigned. What happens?
Well, listen, first of all, I'm proud of the work that our office, particularly spearheaded by Kathy Keena, my chief deputy, to work with our sheriff's office and to help our sheriff be able to release nonviolent offenders who have been arrested or who were initially in the jail on March 1st. We've reduced our jail population significantly. In fact, it's back.
I was going to ask about that, because that seems to be a trend that has become very popular nationwide, as opposed to people who are being held on low bail for minimal crimes and questionable, whether it's driving or whether it's something like that, to get those people out of jails, which seem to be a hot spot for the COVID-19 infection, and get them back to their homes. But then they do have to come back to court. And what happens there?
Yeah, we're certainly not excusing any criminal behavior that occurred, but we're just making it easier for individuals that are in situations where they've been arrested for a non-violent offense to be released back to their homes, as you say, during this pandemic. And we've reduced the jail population. The sheriff's been able to reduce it probably by 70+%. I mean, he's down to back to the population of what it was in the early 1980s compared to what it was just a month and a half ago. So that's been a significant improvement in terms of our ability to keep as many people safe as possible. But we're still dealing with the hearings on a lot of cases that we're dealing with them remotely. We're using Zoom and we're using other technology interfaces with our district court bench as we handle cases under the guidelines that they've established. And those hearings are taking place by phone or through the video technology where possible. Certainly anyone that's been arrested, though, that has to make a first appearance in court, the individual and their attorney are appearing in court before a judge, again, with significant social distancing. And then my staff has been appearing remotely on those hearings, and bail is set or release conditions are set and so forth.
So it's got to place an additional burden on everybody. We're very lucky in this county that we have a sheriff by the name of Tim Leslie, who, as a matter of fact, was supposed to be interviewed today on Access to Democracy. But we put that off because his plate is rather full at the moment. But Tim Leslie does a great job, and I am amazed that the jail population has been able to be reduced back to the 1980 status. That's quite an accomplishment.
Oh, it is. And Sheriff Leslie is an outstanding individual and is doing a great job. He's a great partner in law enforcement efforts in our community with me.
Now,
just to give you an idea, though, if I could, Alan, since the start of this pandemic in early March, we've had close to probably 1,400 criminal cases that have been impacted. And that means these cases, a lot of these things have been continued to future date. So we're really going to face some challenges when things get back closer to normal and all these cases start coming up for hearings. That's when we're going to have a big impact on our office and on our justice system in DAKOTA County. So, there's going to be a lot of work coming up in the future.
Our justice system calls for, in the Constitution as well, speedy trials, but you can't very well have speedy trials where you can't impanel a jury where it's necessary, where you can't go ahead with the prosecution, which is necessary. And obviously everything had to bend, everything had to change, not only here in Minnesota, where we happen to be undergoing a spike in our cases at the moment, unfortunately, but it really has to change the rules on everything.
Well, absolutely, and you're right. We have to respect the constitutional rights of those individuals who've been charged with crimes. They're presumed to be innocent until they're proven guilty to the satisfaction of all 12 members of a trial jury, or to a court if a jury is waived. Once we begin the trials, and we're not going to have any trials taking place in DAKOTA County until June. And once we get back into the stage of trials, I guess we're working right now with our district court judge, and Chief Judge Catherine Meserick has also been doing a phenomenal job working with the issues that are affecting all parts of our justice system in DAKOTA County. And she's working closely with my office and with the defense attorneys as we try to establish the criteria for how are we going to get juries back into our courthouses safely and have enough social distancing so they're not fearful about coming in and doing their important civic duty, because we have to have jurors or our system doesn't work. So we're going to have a lot of challenges. We're going to be working. I just want to assure the public that we're going to do everything we possibly can to keep people safe that are in our courthouses.
I suspect that a lot of people who might have had jury trials will opt to have a bench trial before a judge only as a result of the necessity. Because, you know, you look at a jury box and they're elbow to elbow, even if they have masks on, even if they're wearing gloves, they're elbow to elbow. And obviously that's not going to go while this pandemic is rampant. And if anything, it's going to be with us for quite a while. If you even listen to the most optimum reports as to when we will have a vaccine, we're talking about perhaps a year and a half or 2 years, unless something really incredible happens. So, but in another area, how has crime dropped since the pandemic? Because I have read that crime is actually down quite a bit.
Well, in a number of areas, it has been down, and that's obviously a good thing. I think, you know, people for the most part are doing their part to comply with our governor's stay-at-home orders. But there have been some more burglaries that have been taking place of businesses, not necessarily of homes. There's been some an uptick, as you probably have also read in other places, in areas of domestic violence, and we're concerned about child abuse that may be occurring as well, because one of the biggest reporters of child abuse are our teachers and our school folks. And when kids aren't in school, there's no one to see the bruises that they might have. So we're real worried about that. We want to keep obviously everyone safe, and especially our children. But those are a couple of challenges that we see during this. But I think you are right. There has been a downturn overall in criminal activity in our state and in our nation, and that's a good thing.
A lot of people are not driving or not driving as much, and yet I see that that opens up areas where suddenly people decide to have races on city streets that are pretty much vacant now. And I saw there was a big raid that involved 100 law enforcement officers only about a week ago, where there were drag races. I would think that they had better things to do with their lives and protecting them, but that was pretty shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Mendota Heights, and a very unfortunate situation. I think there were over 100 individuals cited for violations of the law in connection with those cases. Now, most of those will be handled by our city attorneys in Dakota County, who do a terrific job. They handle all the misdemeanor, or most of the misdemeanor level offenses in our communities, and the county attorney prosecutes primarily the felony, the more serious level of crimes.
And what about things like marijuana prosecutions and things like that? I know you and I differed on marijuana some years ago when you were on the show. I was much more liberal about it than you were at the time. And yet I see some recent medical information that indicates that there may be some damage done in terms of people who are habitual smokers.
Well, I still remain a strong opponent to legalizing recreational marijuana. I certainly support the medical work that's being done, that needs to be done to see if there's any medical benefits or more medical benefits that can be derived from marijuana use. But I think I hope our legislature, I hope our governor takes a real close look at some of the information that you're just relaying just now in terms of some of the damage, the potential concerns about children teenagers using more marijuana is significant in terms of their adverse impacts on their brain development. There's a lot of concerns. We could talk for an hour on those issues, and I just think that people need to take a close look at this and that sort of thing.
People are smoking e-cigarettes, and the tobacco companies are making e-cigarettes more, let's say, more interesting or more inviting for youth. And to me, I think that that's just as dangerous as smoking cigarettes, and certainly to the lungs, especially now, where everybody says that one of the first things that's affected in the pandemic with the COVID-19 is the lungs. I would think that you would want to keep your lungs in as good a shape as possible.
Well, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, my colleagues in Ramsey and Washington counties, along with our 3 sheriffs, we have a East Metro Crime Prevention Coalition. Each year we do a program about what we can do to reduce crime and address some important issues. And we just held a forum right before this pandemic started in February of this year on the whole issue of vaping and the huge increase in the use of vaping by our teens. And it's a huge issue. It's a big concern. And we can't lose sight of that issue, and I agree that it needs to be reduced.
And it's certainly an ongoing problem. That
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'll tell you real quickly, because we were just talking about the traffic issues, and there's been a lot less traffic on the roads, but we're seeing a lot more speeding on the roads when there's less traffic. I think you might have read the same story I did in the paper recently about just how many more speeding tickets are being issued by our highway patrol. And the other sad thing, even though we've had significant reductions in the amount of traffic, the number of fatalities on our roads has not decreased. And in fact, it's slightly up from what it was a year ago at the same time. So those are concerns.
I think people are being less careful, and they're driving a little faster. They're paying less attention to signs because they think that they have the road all to themselves. And it comes back in terrible ways to haunt them and to haunt us.
I agree. And another big concern about marijuana use is the impact on impaired driving. And if you look at a number of the states that have already legalized this substance, they've had increases in traffic fatalities related to marijuana use on their roadways. And that's a big concern that we have in law enforcement.
Now, one of the things that obviously has been a boon for your office is advances in DNA and DNA evidence. How have the local authorities dealt with that in terms of the cities or the state?
Well, DNA is a great tool, investigative tool in law enforcement today. As most people know, it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a basic building block of human life. It's in every cell in our body. It's what makes each and every one of us unique as individuals. And other than identical twins, there are no 2 people in the world that have the same DNA structure in their cells. And when
I wish you hadn't said that, because I happen to be in the middle of writing a novel, and identical twins and DNA is a factor in it.
That there has been a few cases across the country where that's happened, and you can't necessarily you have to find other evidence, as we do in many cases, because DNA we can't find it in every case, obviously, and in some cases it's not necessarily helpful, because if you have a rape that's being investigated, for example, and the suspect of that rape is someone who had a consensual relationship with the woman before the rape occurred, well, then finding the semen and DNA is not really going to be that helpful. We had an interesting murder case in Dakota County a number of years ago. It was in Burnsville, where it was ultimately the individual convicted of the murder who killed his estranged or his separated wife. They were in the process of getting divorced, and she was murdered. The DNA of finding the husband's DNA inside of the home that he lived in for 20 years is not going to help us in the case. So we had to look for other things. But what we did find, and it was actually DNA that solved this case. It was the key evidence in the case because there was a lot of blood spatter from when she was smashed in the head with a huge boat tiller from a sailboat and just knocked to the ground. And if she had died right then and there, even though we had strong suspicions of who committed the crime, I don't believe we could have ever convicted the person responsible. But she was able to somehow get to her knees and fight with the person who ultimately strangled her to death and scratch that individual. And on her white tennis shoes, she had 3 or 4 or 5 droplets of blood that when analyzed, in the midst of a lot of her blood that was all over the place, but that was analyzed and found to be the DNA match to her husband who was convicted of murder. So listen,
she probably had some of his DNA under her fingernails also.
Probably.
For the forensic people would have found.
Yeah, that's the one thing they look for it there, and they can find it today. This technology has increased so much since the 1980s, even in the early 90s, we just started using this technology in criminal cases. But today they can find it in just touching the computer that I'm sitting at right now. If I touch it and someone came back and swabbed it, they'd find my DNA on it just from my sweat. And so you used to have a fair amount of blood or semen or something to do a DNA match, but today they can get it off minute quantities of material.
Now you talked about domestic violence, and yes, people are being thrown together who aren't normally together all the time. As a matter of fact, I'm very lucky that Sharon has not taken a hammer to me, but after 8 weeks we've been locked up here. Other than walking the dog twice a day, it's very tough. But with an order of protection, for instance, you serve it on the defendant, but then he violates it, or she violates it, generally he. And has that been more difficult dealing with domestic violence?
Well, we've seen an uptick in some of those cases, unfortunately. Not a significant uptick in Dakota County, but those charges are still occurring. And obviously, we're very concerned for anybody. And what we're really concerned about is we want to make sure that, the victims in those cases have access to help. And there are a lot of great resources in Dakota County for the victims of domestic violence. 360 Communities has some great facilities for battered women and places where they can go to find safety. There's websites and information on Dakota County's websites about issues surrounding mental illness, which we're concerned that people have access to help what they're feeling. Listen, we're under a lot of stress with this pandemic. Everybody is. And, and that can raise levels of depression and other issues that can flare up in some inappropriate, in some cases, violent ways. We want to make sure folks that need help are able to access help, that have mental illnesses or need some assistance. And if you look on Dakota County's website, you'll find some connections to 800 numbers, 24/7 numbers in Dakota County Social Services that people can access for help. And we encourage anybody who's feels frightened, afraid, concerned to reach out and get help.
And we didn't even talk about the civil side of your office, which we will talk about another time, which I know is pretty well shut down, unfortunately. We've been talking with Jim Backstrom. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.